Been at Puppet Labs for a while. So I'm going to talk about AIO, Puppet Collections. You know, what's up with all that stuff? It's new. We're going to talk about it. Eric Sorenson was going to join me. That's Eric right there. So anything that's wrong or bad about this presentation, you should direct toward him. All the good stuff, you should direct toward me. So, I don't like real PowerPoint, real slides, so I handwrite them all. It's just a thing I do. If you're not used to it, I'm sorry. So, my job is to get you excited about the new way we're delivering software upstream. And it doesn't just affect upstream, it affects our commercial product as well. We'll get into that. So, but before we do that, I'll talk a little bit about who I am and why I care about this. Like I said, I've been in engineering at Puppet Labs for about 4 years. We were about 35 people when I got to Puppet Labs. We're just crossing the 400 employee mark now. It's been a growth story. It's been amazing. It's been wonderful. It's also been the hardest job I've ever had by far. And so I also was one of the people that founded EPEL. So if you're a big CentOS or RHEL user, the EPEL repository, I was one of the people that started that. I know a lot about that was not what I was going for. I know a lot about distributions. I know a lot about packaging guidelines. I know why people love them, and I know exactly why I hate them. So we're going to talk about that some too. I also wrote a book in 2005 about SSH. Please buy it. Don't read it. It's out of date. I still get royalties. Anyway, why? The most important thing I want you to understand is there are reasons why we do the things we do, and it's not because we're out to fuck you. We have very good reasons, and if I start with why, I'm hoping that you understand the rest of the journey. So what I want to do is take you from a very awkward moment of looking at what we do and be like, what the hell is this? To figuring out that things can actually be really, really nice using our software and using software collections in AIO. Hopefully, this period is avoided completely. Also, Chuck's my favorite TV show. So why do we do these things? We do them for speed. The same reasons we automate, the same reasons we do everything else. Why are we making changes in the way we deliver software? For speed, for consistency, for portability, and ideally to lower the cognitive load on our end users. Now, there is a cognitive change for the end user because things are changing a little bit, and I apologize that there is a change hill to get over, and hopefully we'll talk about that to get through the presentation. So why? Please keep in mind, I'm going to start everything with why, and then I'm going to get to the what, and then maybe we'll talk about how, and then we'll talk about how everything's terrible at certain times, because it is. So, I want to reduce friction. I want people to be able to use Puppet as fast as possible. I want them to get something out of their automation tool very quickly. If you can't, you get frustrated, and then you think computers are the worst, which they are, but I want you to think that for reasons that are not my software. I also want you to have higher confidence in what you're doing. So, if you can use things more quickly, if you can have a higher reliability, you're going to be happier with the software. I need you to have high confidence. That's a theme throughout the entire thing. If you don't have confidence in your automation system, it will not be successful. So, you want a set of software that works together. That's why we're doing some of the changes we're making. In the past, we've had some issues with that at certain times. Part of those are absolutely my fault. Part of them are absolutely not my fault. They're Eric's fault. So, you don't want major upgrades without opting in. That was something we learned during the Puppet 3 launch. The Puppet 3 launch was an interesting launch, and while it was a little less coordinated than we wanted it to be, it kind of escaped during a Puppet Conf. The launch, we call it the escape of Puppet 3 instead of the launch of Puppet 3. But people accidentally got Puppet 3 in a lot of cases. A lot of people run ensure latest. A lot of people just hit yum-y update and don't really look at what changes are out there. And I don't understand why they do that, but they do. So we're going to do our best to protect that. You're going to have to opt in to get major upgrades. So we wrote a thing called Puppet Collections. It's cut off on the side. So hopefully Puppet Collections, you're like, okay, I can kind of deal with this. What is it? It's a distro for your IT automation tooling. And as someone who built distros in the past, I both loathe and love them. Distros are basically a way of a bunch of software to work together. In the past, you had to get the right Ruby, you had to get the right, Clojure, Java, all the right stuff to run our software, and sometimes that was really easy for certain platforms, and on other platforms it was really terrible. And if it was really easy on two different platforms, they were not really a congruent stack, and they had a lot of variables different between them, and the testing became difficult, and we'll go over all those things. What we're trying to do is get this in one setup, one outward-focused push of here's the thing that works together, it's been validated together, we know it works together, and you can use it with higher confidence. It's tested together. Anybody that tells you that testing is not the hardest problem we have at Puppet Labs doesn't understand what we do at Puppet Labs. Testing is by far the hardest problem we have. And so I want to make sure that we can concentrate on it and get the most bang for our buck from testing things. In the old world, we had literally more than 30,000 combinations to run tests through. Guess what? We didn't run 30,000 combinations of tests. We ran a lot. I mean, thousands of combinations, certainly, but not 30,000. I wanted to reduce this greatly. That was one of the reasons that we wanted to have fewer variables in the stream. Today, in our platform world, we run about 196 main scenarios, at least as of a couple days ago when I grabbed the screenshot. That's significantly fewer than 30,000. This is still not a total boat. This is kind of the most common best bang for buck test cases, but our best bang for buck test cases prior to this was in the 2,400, 2,500 range. So 200 versus 2,500. I can get things right a lot more often in a lot smaller test cases. It's also designed for stability. As a user, I don't want to manage my Puppet system multiple times a year. I want to interact with it. I want it to help me manage change. I don't want to upgrade Puppet for the sake of upgrading Puppet. I don't want to be the person that has to manage the IT automation tool. I don't run Puppet for the fun of it. I do it because I need it to work. I need it to make change on my infrastructure. So I need some stability there, and that's what a Puppet collection does. It gives you some stability. You can get your updates, get some new things with a relative guarantee, and I'm saying relative because software has bugs sometimes. I'm sorry about that. We're going to do our absolute best to make sure we're not going to break your stuff. And in the past, we had some breaking stuff that would just go through and roll through, and sometimes we knew about it, sometimes we didn't. The ones we know about, we're going to talk about and communicate widely. The ones we don't know about, we're going to fix as fast as we can. And it's going to happen sometimes, but that's how we're going to roll. It's also the foundation for our commercial product. And this is important because a lot of people say, well, Puppet Labs, you've gone commercial, you're selling out, you're not doing things upstream. Well, that's not really true. There's a lot going on in the upstream space. We're going to talk about that a lot today. But a Puppet collection is the foundation for Puppet Enterprise. Puppet Collection 1 is literally the foundation that we pull the exact same bits from to make Puppet Enterprise 2015. So it's not different. In fact, the agents are identical. We'll talk about that in a minute. It is the same software. So it's not like we have special sauce that we're rubbing all over things in the agent world. We do have some differences on the server side, but it still starts with all the stuff that's in Puppet Collection 1. So our commercial software is tested using a test system that looks something like this. Actually, I think the UI just got a redesign like last week, but I took a screenshot earlier. This scrolls off the page like down. Like if this was to scale, this would go through the floor in terms of all the different pools of testing that we do for the different scenarios that we have. And this happens on the open source side the same way it does on the commercial side. So what's in a Puppet collection? At this point, it's Puppet. And Puppet becomes an interesting question of what is Puppet. Puppet we used to think of as a GitHub repo at puppetlabs/Puppet. There's a lot more to Puppet these days than that. I can't run Puppet without Factor. I can't run it without Hyra. I can't run it without several other things. Is Puppet Server part of Puppet? Is PuppetDB part of Puppet? And the answer is kind of yes. The answer is also relatively no, depending on how you want to debate it. But I'm going to go with yes because it's the path I believe. And I have a microphone and you don't, so now you get to believe yes. So this diagram, actually Eric did contribute to. It is not terrible. So we have 2015-2, which was the last commercial release that came out for Puppet Enterprise. It's based on Puppet Enterprise Platform v1, which is basically Puppet Collection 1. Puppet Enterprise Collection 2 will be the next thing, and then we'll have differences in Puppet Enterprise as well. So it's basically collections are the foundation, Enterprise is built on top of it. We take that collection foundation and call it a PE API version internally, and I don't know if we actually do that externally or not. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but that's how we signify breaking change. The other thing is we have current and we have next. So right now, if you go out to nightlies.puppetlabs.com, you can start seeing things that are next. Some of them have breaking change. Some of them just have newer stuff that hasn't shipped officially yet. There's some bug fixes in there that you'll probably love in certain cases. So that's how we start building out the next thing. And you're going to see that coming up more. I think probably around the first of the year, we'll start really starting to build out that next Puppet collection with some changes that just have to break. And again, you won't get moved into Puppet Collection 2 unless you say, I want to be in Puppet Collection 2. Otherwise, you can stay in Puppet Collection 1, and your stuff will continue to work. Stability is our goal for that. So at this point, you're a little bit happy. You're like, okay, I kind of understand this, but keep in mind that we are learning how to do this. We're taking some of these bits, we're assembling, we're listening for feedback, we're trying to understand why you care about the things you care about, and we're trying to counterbalance that with our goals of what we're trying to do with delivering software and making sure the user experience is as easy to go as possible. So the next thing is you started having to search for kind of all of these dependencies to get things running. You wanted a consistent experience for naming things. How many of you were ever pissed off that you didn't know what the service name of Puppet was called depending on what platform you were on? Because holy cow, I was. And you know why it was different? Because each of the distros told me it had to be. Which is kind of weird because we wrote the software. I feel like I should be able to name it, but I can't because that's not how distributions work that ship software. So that's why we have our own distribution now. But I wanted consistent naming on things. I wanted to know that things were going to work. And I was tired of fielding questions like, hey, Ruby 1.9 is end of life, but you still have it being used on RHEL 5 or RHEL 4 or RHEL 6 or whatever. And it's like, look, there's a Ruby out there that we test and validate with, and we're just going to include it with our software. And some people love this and some people hate it. I love it because I get the fastest, secure, write Ruby on every platform we support, write for my terms. You might like it because it doesn't interfere with your system Ruby. You might like it because it gives you something that's actually been patched this decade. It's not Ruby 1.8.5 on RHEL 5. You might like it because it's just something you didn't have to think about. We want the Ruby in there to actually be an implementation detail and not a really important part of the stack that you care deeply about. Some people don't like this. If you don't, you can come tell me about it, and I will listen to your complaint, and I will say thank you, and then I probably won't change it. Because this really matters to us. We want the on-ramp and the points of friction to be very low. The other thing is, we bundle OpenSSL. We bundle some of the other dependencies. In some worlds, that's scary. Our security track record for this kind of stuff is quite good. In some cases, we get out security patches faster than Red Hat does. In some cases, we don't. We do perform an impact analysis anytime we learn about a security problem. We talk about it internally and figure out what the risk is. Sometimes we contract maintainers out at like Red Hat or Ubuntu or the other distributions if they're shipping Puppet as well so that we can talk about the problem together. But security is a top priority for everything we're doing. Even though we're bundling software, we assume that risk. We assume that risk of SSL. We assume that risk of Ruby. We assume that risk of Augeus, of all the software that we ship inside of our AIO. That's our problem. That is not your problem. Your job is to hit update when a new one comes out, when you want to, at your leisure. So I don't want you to have to break things, but I do want you to have the ability to have the latest and best thing. So in the old world, we had this weird Venn diagram where we had a set of platforms that were supported commercially. We had a set of platforms that were supported only in the open source world, and we had a large overlap. But there was this weird section on the left side where it was like, wait, as a paying customer, there's literally software that I'm not allowed to use. And that was a rough story. And it was kind of bullshit. So that was one of the goals of the new software process was I want one agent, and I want it to work everywhere. And if you're a paying customer, you can use that agent with our commercial product and get support on it. And I don't care where the agent, what OS it's for. If you want supported Fedora agents and you're running Fedora in production, do it. It's fine by us. The migration story was also a little interesting. If you were a large-time open source Puppet user and you wanted to give us money because you were like, man, I love those people at Puppet Labs, I hope they get paid, we were happy. But you had to go on a journey from something that worked, to spend a bunch of time and effort, and best case scenario, you were back to something that worked. That's kind of not a great story either. So there were several instances where people wanted to pay us, and it just didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense from this point of view. again, you can use any AIO, any agent on the commercial platform. Your migration then becomes a different story. It's not I have to reinstall every agent, 10,000 nodes or whatever. It's I have to point them at a new commercial master. It's a very different involvement. The other thing is sometimes we just didn't belong. One of these things is not like the other. I'll give you a hint. It's the cat. And distro guidelines is really where this came in. For a long time, we did our best to fit into every distro that we supported. And that meant on Debian, we looked like a package that belonged on Debian. That meant on RHEL, we looked like a package that belonged on RHEL. And I had to read through the Debian Maintainers Guide, and I had to read through all the Fedora packaging guidelines, and all the EPEL rules, and all the rules of being a package even in worlds like AIX, Linux extensions, and just all of these things where there are rules, and there are good reasons to have those rules, and there are good reasons to know when to break those rules. And we've chosen to break a lot of them. So if you were like, I only run RHEL with EPEL, or I only run RHEL straight up, things are going to feel a little weird. And part of that is, I wanted a consistent user experience. When we went back to why, I want things to be easy, I want friction to be low, I need this to be easy for users. If you don't know how to restart a daemon because you don't know what the name of it's going to be, because you don't know what platform you're on, or you don't remember what platform you're on, that's a problem. I want it to be the same everywhere. I want the name of the package to be the same everywhere. We couldn't even get that right because Debian said it had to have, certain things had to be prefixed with Ruby in the name because it was written in Ruby, which, again, that's an implementation detail. I don't know why that matters in certain cases. But for Debian, it absolutely did. And then on other places, they're like, no, you can just call it, Puppet, or Hyra can just be called Hyra, not Ruby Hyra, and things like that. And it's just weird stuff that is a cognitive load that you shouldn't have to deal with. I'll deal with it, and I'll think about it. And the way I solved it was, I'm going to say it's going to be the same. We're upstream. We understand how we want to deliver the software. It's a little different. You may disagree with parts of it. File paths. We had to change file paths for basically everything in the AIO. And I know that that's painful for a lot of people. We wanted to be outside the main FHS. We wanted to be outside of user. And the reason for that is some people do things in user. Some people have weird rules in user. We needed to be out on our own where we could control the full stack. And we couldn't just be like, hey, we're going to squash over your existing system files. We had to be out on our own. Some of the paths people love, some of them they hate, some of them they're confused about. We have a whole specification guide of how they're set up and why they're set up, and there's pull requests against it and discussions, and that's all in public. And I'll have a link to that in the end of the presentation. There are reasons these things are going on. There are reasons we chose opt. There are reasons that we put things in Etsy Puppet Labs for configuration. There are reasons we didn't put stuff in var opt, even though FHS says if you have stuff in opt, you should put it in var opt. And the reason is no one liked it that way. We did that with Puppet Enterprise, and everybody's like, why do I have to have stuff in 5 file systems? So we're like, all right, we're going to put all the stuff in opt except for logs because you all want them in var log, and except for configuration because everybody wants that in Etsy. Everything else is self-contained in opt. So we also bundle our software, like I said. I wasn't allowed to do that in distro guidelines, although Fedora approved conditional bundling last night, if you were watching the Fedora Develop mailing list. I thought that was really interesting. And also, when you install the package, does Puppet start or not? Well, again, it depends on which distribution you're on and what the rules are. On Debian, they like things to start, unless they have a defaults file that says not to start. On Red Hat, they almost never want it to start because they feel like a system administrator should have to take some kind of action to introduce risk onto the system. Again, I understand both points of view. We had to pick one. Where do certs go? That location is different on different systems. Where do you put your certificates? And then, my favorite one, by favorite I mean the thing I absolutely hate, is what patches are distributions carrying. More bugs than should have ever been introduced have been introduced by people carrying patches against our software. And then we have to get weird bug reports and have to figure out why. And there are a couple distributions that are kind of notorious for this, of carrying large sets of patches and not turning them upstream. Ubuntu. And it's just difficult to deal with eventually. And so we try and work with the maintainers. We're trying to figure out, well, what's the problem you were actually seeing for this patch? And sometimes they just rewrote it because they were digging in and had fun doing it. And that's a terrible reason to have patches. But in other times, they're like, well, we saw this one bug and we wanted to fix it, and you guys said you could fix it this other way. And we were like, yeah, but that breaks something on this other platform. And they were like, well, we're not that platform. We don't care. And so they would choose to fix it in a weird way. Again, sometimes it didn't affect people. Sometimes it did. What you end up with is Puppet the way that we see Puppet. the way that we want the experience to be. And the reason we want it that way is because that's actually what users are telling us they want. We don't sit there in an ivory tower and say, this is what we're gonna do. We try and get feedback from people. We say, well, how do you wanna solve this problem? What would you like the service name to be? We weren't really sold on one name or another. Is it Puppet? Is it Puppet D? Is it Puppet Agent? And actually, I don't even remember which one we chose, but it's the same everywhere. I know that. So that's important. So enter the AIO. AIO is all-in-one. It's not asynchronous I/O. I'm sorry. We have a conflict with acronyms. There's only so many three-letter acronyms in CS, and we've run out, apparently. AIO is all-in-one. Some people might call this an omnibus-style package. That's allowed, I guess. We like calling it all-in-one because it was kind of more about the delivery and more about kind of the mental state than it was about the tool to build it. So we have an AIO, and you're like, oh, all right, this is interesting, it's new. Here's what's inside the AIO as the last one shipped upstream. So you can see there's a bit of software in there. The things that are important to some people may not be important to others. The thing I care about is that you get a fully functional Puppet agent, and that agent works with our commercial product, and that it works with our open source products. And that if you want to switch between one to the other, 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 it's the same agent. You can go both ways. We were not designing a one-way migration. Also, some of these have amazing fun to build and compile, and I will tell all the war stories in the world if you want about it later. So there was prior art on kind of doing this kind of bundling for software. Some of my favorite pieces of software had really just decided, look, we're going to ship the runtime and the libraries we need because we need to be functional, and we did not worry about the variance between distributions and the variance on platforms that you're running, and what patch level you're on, and if you've applied a patch today versus last Tuesday. All of these pieces of software, and Apple's kind of the whole application model, you bundle everything in an app folder. These were things that I looked at and thought, hey, people seem to like this software. They don't seem to complain about it too much. What if we did that? And there's some other software that does this as well. I just kind of picked a few to give an example. But, you know, it's not unheard of these days. I think 5, 6 years ago, I'm happy that I'm not blazing this trail because it's an uphill battle for certain people. People that build Linux distributions still don't like this model. People that use software turn out they kind of like it. So that's that. Our goals and our why was to be consistent and to have a great time to value experience and really to be easier to grasp. Instead of thinking about, I need this Ruby, this OpenSSL, this combination of software, I have an AIO. I have a Puppet agent, it's version 1.2.5. That's really all you need to think about. I have Puppet agent version 1.2.5. That's what I hope you can grasp out of it. So there were some trade-offs. Like I said, we had to get out a user. We went over to opt. Some people don't like it. I'm sorry. We chose not to put all of our binaries in your path by default. That may have been a mistake. It's difficult to do well because I either have to mess with a global profile or I have to put symlinks in a place that I'm not sure I'm allowed to write to. And so we're trying some different things on how to fix this. Right now we have in a version of the AIO that's not released yet, it's on Nightly's, we have the path fixed in etcprofile.d for anything that supports in etcprofile.d. But it also means that once you install the software, you still have to source the profile because it's not going to do that automatically in your shell because it would spawn a subshell to do it, and that doesn't work. We bundle software, and like I said, we're FHS-ish. We followed the FHS model mostly. The var opt thing we elected not to do because of the feedback we had had in earlier versions of Puppet Enterprise that people generally didn't like it. And I think that's really the only case. There's a couple of things where the file, like the path names, may seem non-intuitive in certain cases. We call certain things a cache that used to be called a vardir. It meets both definitions. You know, the cache means it can be regenerated if it's blown away. That is a cache, and it can do that. It used to be called vardir in a lot of cases. The variable's still vardir, so it's, you know, 6 one, half a dozen the other. I guess it's not that important. There's other benefits that we get from unifying this agent. You get one set of docs, both from Puppet Labs and from the ecosystem at large. I hated going to a blog post and being like, if you're doing this with open source, do this. If you're doing this in Puppet Enterprise, type this other set of commands, and that's different. And oftentimes it meant that people were only going to talk about one piece of software or the other, and that's not good for you because that means there's less learning material that applies directly to you. It's not good for me because it splits a dichotomy down the ecosystem. Logs are all in one spot now. We used to have logs kind of slathered all over the place. There's like a var log Puppet Labs, and everything is in there somewhere, which is way better. Migrations we talked about. Legacy compatibility. We're able to get a new stack of software on some very old operating systems. I've been working with AIX pretty much nonstop for the last, I don't know, 120 days or so. And it's been an interesting time. With RPM 3.3 that came out in 1999, it's pretty awesome to work with that and try and get GCC 5.2, which came out a month ago, working on it. We kind of did it. No, it's still in progress in certain cases. But it's about time to value, and then security as well. So if I give you a newer OpenSSL, even if it's an operating system that came out in 2004, RHEL 4, something like that, you can get OpenSSL 102, you can run in FIPS mode if I enable that in the compile, you can run with new ciphers, you can get things that are not kind of that legacy oldness. And part of that means we don't want you to have to go to lowest common denominator security because you have an old agent somewhere in your entire system. We want you to be able to stay at a higher level of security overall. And it is about the ecosystem. It's also about partners, right? So before, partners had to pick, well, do I want to work with an open source product or a commercial product? And we, as Puppet Labs, said, well, you should work with our commercial product. And they would say, well, you have way more community people than you do in terms of commercial users. And so they would want to opt for one or the other. Now that choice is made for them. You work with our agents, and everything's good. You speak our protocols, and everything's good. So another way to look at this is, if you've played with Git, you can use it, and then you can point your origin or your upstream to GitHub, and you start to get a whole world of new experiences. You get a better Git, in some cases, you could argue. I'll argue it's a better Git workflow. With Puppet, what you can do is you can get Puppet as an open source. You can make Puppet do a lot of things, sing and dance, have all the integration points. You can also just point it to Puppet Enterprise as a server, and you get an enhanced Puppet, an augmented Puppet. So that's kind of the way I want you to think about it, is the agents are the same, but you can point to a new master, a new upstream, to get some better and different functionality. There's also a Puppet module that helps you upgrade. So there is some pain to upgrade because there's a migration. Some things are in different paths. Some settings didn't carry over one-to-one. We try and do our best to introspect your system and to help you get there. This Puppet agent module, which by the way, I think it's confusing because this is Puppet _ agent and the package is Puppet - agent. Anyway, naming things, still not a solved problem. Anyway, this module exists. It is getting written. It is getting kind of fixed up upstream. It's improving all the time. We're adding new platform support. The nice thing about it being on the Forge is we can ship it pretty often. So improvements on the way. Like I said, we have Path. The M Collective ecosystem really hasn't made most of its way into Puppet Collection 1. And I apologize for that. It was a conscious decision. It wasn't like we didn't know we were doing that. It was just, it had to be done in the interest of time. ActiveMQ, we need to get it into Puppet Collection 1. We need to get the M Collective plugins to fit with the AIO. They just haven't yet, and I apologize. It's on the list of things to do. We're going to get to it soon. If you really hate it, you can come talk to me and say it needs to happen tomorrow, and I'll listen to you, and we'll figure out if it can happen tomorrow. The other thing is we want things to register as gems. I think you turned in that bug. You know, when you hit gem list on our Ruby, like the internal vendored Ruby, sometimes you want things to register as gems so that when you do a gem install of another tool, the dependencies are already met. You can use our Ruby to do, you know, gem install server spec or something like that so that you have a better testing framework in there inside of our AIO. In all of our platforms, if you query the package, the description has a list of every component that's in there. And it does vary slightly based on different platforms because in some cases you have to build things that you don't have to build on other platforms. For instance, we build SE Linux bindings on Ruby for platforms that support SE Linux. We don't build them on platforms that don't support SE Linux. Imagine that. So hopefully you're feeling a little bit better about the way we're delivering our software upstream and understanding the reasons why. And I know that there's some frustration that you want to be able to have your own AIO with your own kind of special sauce in there, your own components, maybe your own version of certain software because you have standards. Sure. You want to customize the setup. You don't necessarily want the one-for-one, here's what I was handed from Puppet Labs. I want you to have that experience as well. This is still open source software. This isn't me closing things off because you suck and I don't. It's not about that at all. This is about how we can deliver value the fastest. So you want to rebuild our AIO. I hear it time and time again. I get asked about it several times a week in an IRC. And I will start with everything in the AIO is open source. There is nothing in there that is commercial, and it will stay that way as long as I'm able to fight and keep things right. I lobby for this all the time. We've had discussions about putting closed source stuff in that agent. I don't think it's going to happen. Really, really don't think it's going to happen. So everything in the AIO is open source. It's going to stay that way. The source for everything we have is on GitHub up there. But for other stuff that we bundle, most of it's on GitHub. You can find the URLs in different spots. And if you don't know where to look for different software, I'm happy to help you find it. Our source for how we package things is not open source yet. And the goal, this isn't because we wanted to close it off. It's because the way we developed it, there's a lot of site-specific stuff in there that just wouldn't be useful to a lot of you. And some of it is, there was some experimentation in there. There was some stuff that definitely needs to be cleaned up, and I'm not super proud of parts of it. But it will be open source soon. And when I say soon, I don't mean like 2016. I mean sooner than that. But it's not open source, and so we can all be sad about it for a minute. So we wanted to build a build system that worked everywhere. We wanted to generate things. We wanted to be able to generate these artifacts on 70-plus platforms because we support around 70 targets for running Puppet. And a target is, the operating system version, the architecture, and that's really about it. We have that. We do network switches. We do compute platforms. We have things running all over the place. And so you have to have a build system that's portable. We wanted it to be very serviceable for developers. The last thing my team wants to do, which the release engineering team does a lot with packaging, is really help you figure out how to package something. I don't want to do that. I want to write the tool that you interact with that does that, and I want to maintain that pipeline. But I don't want to say, well, here's the macro you use in a spec file, and here's the rules file you use for Debian. That's just kind of stuff that I've got better things to do. My team has better things to do than that. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't need a lot of dependencies on the target systems. There were other tools out there that did some of this stuff. Turns out when Ruby's one of the first things you build, having a tool that runs in Ruby doesn't work that well. There's a bootstrapping problem there. Having Java out there to do all the builds is just nuts, so we're not going to do that. We didn't want to require external tools. We wanted to leverage our existing test infrastructure. I showed you that graphic earlier where we have all these pools of systems going on all the time. We go through somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 VMs a day in terms of testing and pipeline jobs, and so they all get torn down and flipped back around and all this. And we wanted our build system to use the same tool. We wanted them in parallel. We wanted to reuse all the imaging that we're already doing for testing because I don't want to have to make new images for things. And basically have a handoff between the pipeline between test and build be very, very clean. Now, those are my requirements, and they probably don't matter as much to you, but they were super important when we developed this tool. So really the interaction paradigm with this tool is, do you have rsync, do you have SSH, and is there a libc on the box? If you've got those three things, you can be a build target with our software. So I'm going to announce some new software today. I love this GIF. It's great. If you haven't watched Chuck, please do. It's awesome. Our software is called Vanagon. And part of that is because when you go out in a Vanagon, you've got everything you need. You can just live out there. You can live in the van. It's a little unfortunate that VW had this giant emissions scandal. But we have nothing to do with VW, actually. I don't know why this GIF looks anything like something from Volkswagen. So it's at github.com, puppetlabs.com, or puppetlabs/Vanagon. And I think you'll be able to see some examples there. There's some information there on the Yard doc. It's got full API. It's very well documented. I think the software is a joy to work with. I actually think it's one of my favorite pieces of software we've done. I'll talk a little bit about the syntax for it. So basically, in this instance, I was building out a complete create repo stack on Debian because the create repo on Debian just isn't that great because it depends on libxml, which has several bugs, and we can get into that if you want later. It's terrible. But I was just building out RPM as part of that stack on Debian. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I have to do. But you just kind of load up, okay, here's the version, here's the sum, here's where I'm downloading it from, here's a couple C flags, and then you get down to like, okay, I've got configure, I've got build. It's a Ruby DSL, but that all happens on the client side. So there's a controller where the Ruby executes, but on the target side, it basically runs rsync and make. So it's a very simple build system. It's very simple to interact with, but it's very powerful. I've had developers say, this is the most sense packaging's ever made. I've had developers say they really like this tool. I feel good about that. My customers are developers, so if I can make them happy, I usually feel pretty good. If you look at a project tree, this is that same one where I was building create repo on Debian because I'm a masochist. You can see that we have kind of, the different components that make this stuff up. I wanted to get to create repo. To do that, I first had to build the world. And then we have kind of the targets that we're building for. In this case, it was just Debian 7 and Debian 8. And then I had some patches for some stuff because Yum and friends do not like to live not in user. They're really terrible about it. So I had to patch a bunch of stuff. But that's basically a tree structure. Matt House, if you guys don't know him, he was the first release engineer who wasn't me at this company. And he wrote Vanagon basically end to end, and it is a badass piece of software. So if you ever see him, please thank him. He's moving off my team next month, and it's kind of making me sad. But he's going to go write some Clojure. Our tool chain to build out the AIO is C++11 for the hard parts, and that's factor. If you guys haven't noticed, parts of our agent are moving into C++. The reasons for that are around portability. The reasons for that are around speed. The reasons for that are around, oh my God, Ruby. So C++11 is required. We also use CMake at a pretty recent version, Boost at a pretty recent version, and YAML CPP at a pretty recent version. That's just part of the tool chain. Getting GCC 4.8.2 or higher going on some of those older platforms is a nightmare. Ask me how I know. So we have about 70 targets, and we're constantly increasing that. I think we have another 40 kind of on the roadmap for the next 12 months, so that's not a small amount. And the tool works on every type of Unix environment. Windows is also being added currently. We're starting to scope out that work. We have a couple people flying into a hack house for a while in Belfast to go work on this soon. We're going to have Windows support. We want to have one tool chain across the board, and Windows is just as important to us as any Unix platform is. The reason that it didn't happen right away was Windows was actually the first platform to deliver in an all-in-one. That was where we learned a lot about it because it was just a single MSI that had Ruby and had everything in it, and so it was actually a less burning platform than kind of the Linux stuff was and the Unix stuff was to start with. I have used this tool on all of these architectures at one time or another already, so I know it works, and I know it works from OSs that are very old until things that are not even out yet that are in beta. And there are some complaints about this stuff, and I'm not here to tell you that everything's all roses. Some of the decisions we made knowing that not everybody was going to be happy. Part of this is we want you to think about Puppet as the technology that solves your problem, not necessarily the GitHub repo that was Puppet Labs/Puppet. The Puppet agent is a collection of things that you need to automate your system. It's not necessarily just Puppet 4.2.3 or whatever is in the stack. There's Puppet, there's Ruby, there's Hyra, there's Factor, there's Augius. Like, all of that makes a better automation suite. And as we add more things in there, like PCP, as we talked about this morning, the Puppet Communications Protocol, that's going to be in there. That's part of Puppet now. It's got to be there for great functionality. So the Puppet agent is the thing you really need to think about mentally, and that's a transition for a lot of people. It's a little different. It's not perfect. The file path. There are certain file paths people are just bitching about on the internet. It's going to happen. If things are incorrect, I'd at least rather than be consistently incorrect everywhere than to be correct certain times and incorrect at other times. So it's at least consistent. We can debate file paths in a lot of cases. I'm just kind of like, look, it's picked. You can kind of deal with it. It's not the end of the world. The MCO ecosystem, like I said, we have not pulled up with a lot of the AIO yet. It will happen soon. It's not that we don't love them collective. It's that it's sometimes difficult to work with. So, and then other architectures, things like ARM, things like I want to run on Power. All that stuff's great, and we do it, and our stuff works there. And unfortunately, right now, because of kind of the dichotomy of the Puppet agent packaging software being closed source, it's difficult for you guys to get a build on that. So I apologize for that, but it will be fixed as soon as we can get it there. So in summary, we've made a lot of changes with the goals of stability, user experience, ease of use, time to value all in mind. We have collections, we have an AIO, we have some new software, agent rebuilds are coming soon. Another thing I want to touch on really quickly was a tool called EasyBake. That was open sourced yesterday at the Contributor Summit. It's mostly a tool around building Clojure services. So if you want to package up a Clojure service, that's what we use to build Puppet Server and a lot of the commercial software as well. That's all open. It may be somewhat useful to you, it may not be, but I'd rather it just be open and people can poke through it and ask questions if they want to. So, I don't know if at this point you're ready to give high fives to me, or if you hate me, but that's what's going on. I'm hoping at least you can be kind of in this fake, yay, I'm kind of okay with it kind of way. EasyBake's also there, based on the classic EasyBake oven. And I have a lot of references kind of as to if you want to learn more, and this will be up on, I guess, SlideShare or Speaker Deck or something in the end. The people that run the conference take care of that. But there's a lot of links here that you can build on, learn more about. I'm Stahnke on virtually every system in the world. So you can hit me up on Twitter that way. You can hit me up on IRC, Slack. I mean, I'm available on every social medium known to man. Please, let's find another one. It'll be awesome. It'll fix all the problems we have with the previous ones. Another thing I want to talk about is, while I have your attention and I have a microphone and you don't, I'm running SysAdvent this year. I'm one of the people running it. If you haven't read SysAdvent, it's a blog that comes out every day in December until Christmas. It's usually got great articles. If you haven't contributed to it before, I would love to talk to you and get you to contribute. CFP is open until October 20th. Come talk to me afterwards if you want to be a part of it. And again, my name's Mike Stahnke. I'm Stahnke on Twitter. I hope you learned something about the way we want to deliver our software. I hope you've learned a little bit about what's coming in the future. And I hope you don't quite hate me. So, thanks. We got a little bit of time. I have time for a couple questions, if anybody has one.
Van again. How is that different from the Omnibus package?
So, when we first looked at Omnibus, there were a couple things that made it not work for us. There's one obvious one, and that's that it's written by Chef. And that really wasn't the reason that we didn't use it, honestly. That's the one that everybody thinks it was. The requirement of having Ruby on the system meant that it was very difficult to get builds going in certain cases, and the requirements of Vagrant, which I don't know if those actually exist anymore, but Vagrant used to be a very integral part of the Omnibus system, in my understanding. Again, I actually didn't do this comparison. My team did. We can't get Vagrant working with all of the systems and targets we support. And so we needed something that was kind of a different layer, a little bit lower level, a little bit less tightly coupled with the system we were building on. That was kind of the main thing. The other thing was getting it directly to feed into our testing system and using the same technology under the hood. Our testing system heavily leverages a thing called VM Pooler, which I think was on my references slide. I turned off the remote. It's not, I should have added it. There's a thing called VM Pooler at Puppet Labs that's kind of the backbone of all of our testing system. And it interfaces with that directly by default. It doesn't have to, but that's like the default engine for it. There's also a Docker engine and other things like that for the way you can build software. And so it's kind of, we have some abstractions there available. So it's not that Omnibus was terrible or didn't work or anything. It was just kind of, it didn't meet all of our needs.
So do you plan to have like recipes or scripts that can reproduce and build other types of packages beyond Puppet-related things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We use it to build a lot of stuff internally already that's not anything related to Puppet. Like, I mean, the create repo stack had nothing to do with Puppet. It was Python and C++ and C in there. And we did it just because it was a great tool to shove a bunch of stuff in too quickly and get a fat package out of it. And we'll have some other examples popping up in the next couple weeks as my team figures out what goes open really quickly and what has to take some purity and linting before we can open it up. You have the microphone, you call, Brian.
Anyone else?
I think we have one up here.
Oh.
Got a minute 40.
Easy one.
All right.
So from the PE perspective, we run the AIX agent, and it was really odd that when you looked at that agent, it had things that looked like they were PE and then things that looked like they were open source, as far as like path names. Do you know if a lot of that stuff got changed?
It all is getting changed. The AIO, the Puppet 4, Puppet Agent 1.2 series, 1.3 series, is uniform across the board for all paths and things like that. And for AIX, it is, that agent has not come out yet for AIX because C++ on AIX is amazing. But once that comes out, it will be identical with pathing, and it will look the same everywhere. And you won't be able to say, is this hybrid commercial or open source, because it's just the agent. So. Yeah, OK, I'll be around if anybody wants to talk to me about SysAdvent or packaging or yell at me or throw tomatoes. You can also do that with Eric. Thanks.